Recently, I heard a logical contradiction of God from an atheist. This contradiction is, how can God create time? Because I said, hey, the Big Bang, that was God creating space, time, and matter. And he's like, well, how can God create time? And that's a logical contradiction. And so he described it to me like this, right? So if there is an action, then there is time, right? So an action would be a change from one period of time to another period of time. And so every time that we see an action, we see a change. But then you might say, okay, well, God is on a separate timeline that is just infinite, and he is eternal. The problem with this is you can't really have an infinite timeline, because you kind of get into a paradox where how did we get to now if there's an infinite amount of time before now? So it's like, why did God wait so long to make the earth? Well, he waited an infinite amount of time, so therefore it never happened. Because if you wait an infinite amount of time for something, then that basically means by definition it's never going to happen. So classic theology says that God is beyond time. God is timeless. And this is not fully comprehensible because we live in time. So when we think of something timeless, we think of something that never goes away, something that's eternal. And while God is eternal, he also is timeless. So it's not like he has an infinite amount of time, but rather he doesn't have time at all. He doesn't exist in time. So the atheist said to me, how can you say that God is beyond time if you can't even explain what that means? And while I could explain the idea, I can't explain exactly how something is beyond time. I can't explain God's timeless nature in a way that we would understand it in our temporal understanding and in our finite minds, right? But then he said to me, how can you even say something if you can't explain what it means? That's just like you telling me blah, blah. It has no meaning. And well, I want to point out the difference between understanding and comprehending. Well, we can't fully comprehend God's timeless nature. We can understand that God is timeless, and we can understand implications of that, but we can't exactly nail down God's nature. Because when you exist in a timeline, then a timeless anything is a logical contradiction. Because, well, we live in a timeline, so how can something be timeless? That's why we say God is beyond time. So then you might ask, why did God wait so long to create time? Which is kind of funny when you think about it, because this is insinuating that there was a time before God created. And if we go with the premise that God is timeless, then there wasn't really a time before God decided to create, because God is timeless. He's not just on a different timeline that's infinite, but he is timeless. So one thing to point out with this is that God, when he's looking at our timeline, doesn't see it sequentially. So it's not like he's living in his own timeline and looking at our timeline, right? It's not like watching a movie from start to end. He sees our whole timeline in one glance. So to him, there is no past, present, future, because there is no time. Now, he can say in scripture before the creation of the earth, because he's relating it to our timeline. So he looks at our timeline, he's like, look, in your timeline, before all this, I was. And after all this, I am. Right? But that doesn't mean that he lives on his own timeline. We can still apply the fact that he's timeless. So how I like to look at it is God is standing here, right, in a timeless moment, and he's holding creation in his hands, right? He creates it, and in one instant, he acts in our timeline. So in God's timeline, we could say that God is creating, and he also intervenes in our timeline, right? But there's no time in between that. He does those actions at the same time. And we also see this laid out in scripture where it's, one day is equal to 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is equal to 1 day to God, because they're equal to each other, meaning that there's no difference. There's no difference between a day and 1,000 years. So therefore, it's not just like there's a small difference. There's literally no difference, because time does not matter to God. Rather, it's just something that he created, and he literally just can do whatever he wants with it. All right, guys. Well, that's the end of the video. Let me know if you disagree with me or if you agree with me and the reason why, because I'm totally open to change my position on this, but this is the best understanding of it that I have right now. If you like the video, leave a like, comment, and I'll see you guys around.